Growing up, I never imagined my mother would kick me out for her new family. I thought that after everything we had been through, she would always be there for me. But the reality was far different. Let me explain how everything fell apart. I was born when my mother was just 20 years old. My biological father never wanted children. She told me that after dating for only a few months, she became pregnant and gave him the option to leave, which he did without hesitation. They never spoke again. Although she was hurt and bitter about their breakup, she never demanded child support, and he refused to pay. It was a mutual agreement, one that suited them both. Despite the hardship, my mother had my grandparents' unwavering support. With their help, she was able to finish her schooling and secure a stable job. She dated a few men when I was younger, and when I was about 8, she began a serious relationship with Harry, a coworker. After dating for 3 years, they married, and things started to change. We weren't very close, but Harry and I got along well enough to tolerate each other. Life seemed stable. That was until, 4 years after their marriage, my mom became pregnant with twins. Everyone was excited, including me. In retrospect, I should have seen what was coming, but I was too focused on the idea that my mom would always support me, no matter what. But as soon as she became pregnant, things began to shift. She distanced herself from me, and I assumed it was just a phase. I hoped things would get better once the baby was born. But they didn't. When she was about 6 months pregnant, she and Harry sat me down for a serious conversation. They told me they couldn't afford to keep me in the house anymore with 2 new babies to care for. Legally, they couldn't kick me out as I was only 16. But they made it clear that my presence was a financial burden. They tried to convince me that it was just a matter of money, that they needed to save for the twins' future. In their words, the twins deserved more than I did. It was a devastating blow. I offered to get a job to help with the expenses, but my mom refused. She said that the resources should go to the children who needed it more. She didn't say needed, she said deserved. That was the moment I knew. They wanted me gone. I didn't have the strength to argue. I knew I was unwanted. So, I left without even being told where to go. My only option was to go to my grandparents' house. They were upset, but they didn't cut my mother off. They wanted to remain close to the twins, so they continued to visit. As for me, I was left to figure things out on my own. At 16, I found a part-time job. I couldn't rely on my grandparents for financial support. They were older and didn't have the means to help. When my mom and Harry came to visit with the twins, I'd see them occasionally, but the atmosphere was cold. They never asked about me. They acted as if they were happy without me. It hurt, but I had no choice but to accept it. My mother's lack of affection made me feel like I didn't matter to her anymore. I lived with my grandparents during college. They weren't financially well off enough to help me with tuition, and my mom wasn't involved at all. I had to take out a student loan. Thankfully, one of my uncles agreed to co-sign for me. He was the only one who helped me through that time. It was a rough few years, working part-time jobs to pay off my loan while studying. But I pushed through. By the time I graduated, my mom still hadn't reached out. Not once did she congratulate me. My grandparents attended my graduation, and that was it. After college, I got a job and started living independently. Although I didn't make much money at first, I managed to cover my bills and started paying off my debts. My career slowly improved, and after a few years, I reached a position I was proud of. At 33, I had a senior management role at the same company where I started my career. I had worked hard to get where I was, and I was proud of my achievements. But my success came with an unexpected complication. My mother found out. She learned that I had done well, and somehow, she thought it was time to reach out. It was my uncle who unintentionally reintroduced her into my life. At a family gathering, he mentioned my promotion, and she was shocked that I hadn't contacted her. I hadn't spoken to her since I started college, but now, after all these years, she came knocking. She and Harry showed up at my door unannounced. They began by talking about how hard the past few years had been for them. They said they had started a business that failed, and now they needed money. The twins were getting close to college age, and they wanted me to help pay for their education. I was stunned. They had the nerve to come to me, years after abandoning me, and ask for my financial support. They made it sound like I owed them something, because they had raised me. I was furious. I reminded them that they had refused to help me pay for college when I needed it. They chose to save money for their biological children, and now they expected me to pay for their education? I told them in no uncertain terms that I would not be helping. I didn't owe them anything. The conversation quickly turned ugly. They tried to guilt-trip me, claiming I was being ungrateful for everything my mother had done for me. They reminded me of the sacrifices she made when I was younger, but I knew the truth. She had only been there when it was convenient for her. She had pushed me out the moment I became inconvenient. I asked them to leave. The argument escalated, and when they refused, I threatened to call the police. That was the point I realized that everything had changed. My mother's idea of family was twisted. She saw me as a tool to be used, and now, after all these years, she wanted me to pay for the consequences of her actions. My mother and Harry left after some more yelling and blaming, and I finally blocked her from my life once again. I never wanted to speak to her again.
She hadn't changed.
She still tried to manipulate me, still tried to guilt me into doing what she wanted. Later, I discussed the situation with my grandparents, and they agreed that I was right. They couldn't believe how my mother had acted. But they didn't want to lose contact with the twins, so they promised to try to help my mother see reason. It was a delicate balance, but I didn't owe her anything. I had already given everything I could as a child, and she had thrown it all away. Months later, my mother continued to send me emails, reminding me of all the sacrifices she had made. I ignored them. I didn't need to explain myself any further. She hadn't changed, and she never would. As much as it hurt, I realized that I had to let go of the idea that she would ever be the mother I wanted her to be. And now, I find myself questioning if I'm right. Should I be helping my siblings? Should I forgive my mother? I don't know. But I do know one thing. I will not be manipulated into feeling guilty for someone else's mistakes.